The night was unusually quiet. Streetlights flickered across the empty sidewalks, and a faint wind whispered through the alleyways. Inside his small apartment, Daniel sat hunched over his phone, scrolling endlessly through profiles on dating apps. Each swipe, each chat, each rejection left a strange hollow in his chest, a sense he couldn't name. Something felt off, though he didn't know exactly what. He had always thought he understood women, or at least he thought he did. He had studied social media profiles, read articles, and even asked his friends for advice. Yet here he was, in the middle of the night, exhausted, frustrated, and more confused than ever. There was a pattern emerging, but it was invisible, like a secret code just out of reach. Daniel paused on a profile, a woman with a playful smile and eyes that seemed to hide 1,000 stories. He swiped right. Moments later, a match appeared. Excited, he typed a careful message, but within hours it fizzled out. Another message left unread. Another conversation vanished into silence. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Why do women behave this way, he wondered. He didn't yet know it, but he was standing at the threshold of a forbidden door. A door almost no man dared to open. Behind it lay truths about female desire, hidden patterns and psychological forces that governed attraction and connection. Forces that most men unknowingly walk straight into, only to get hurt, confused, or obsessed. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "Why is it always like this?" he muttered under his breath. There had to be an explanation, a reason why women were so confusing, so unpredictable. But the answer wasn't in articles, dating tips, or shallow advice from friends. It was deeper, darker, and terrifyingly real. As he scrolled again, his phone lit up with another profile, another smile, another mysterious aura. He felt the pull, a curious attraction he could not resist. He knew it would probably lead him down the same path. Excitement, confusion, disappointment. And yet, he couldn't stop. Something about the human psyche, something about desire, kept luring him forward, like an invisible current beneath the surface. Then he remembered something he had read long ago. Carl Jung, the renowned psychologist, spoke about the unconscious, those hidden parts of our minds that shape behavior without our awareness, about archetypes, shadows, and the deep forces that pull people towards certain patterns in relationships. Jung had studied desire, not just as a surface-level attraction, but as a complex interplay of conscious and unconscious motives. Daniel's heart raced. Could it be that everything he had been struggling with, every confusing text, every sudden ghosting, every irresistible pull he couldn't explain, was part of something bigger, something invisible? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. He imagined it as a door, a dark, ancient door hidden behind the everyday surface of human interaction. Most men walk past it, blind to what lay beyond, but those who dared to open it saw things they could never unsee, things about women, about desire, and about themselves. A chill ran down his spine. Daniel realized he had been trying to solve the puzzle from the wrong side of the door, using tools that could never work. Dating apps, pickup lines, clever texts. They were all shallow distractions from a much deeper truth. A truth about female desire, about attraction, about psychological forces that operated like silent currents beneath the calm waters of everyday life. He pictured the stories he had heard from friends, from colleagues, from strangers in passing. Men drawn to women who seemed perfect, only to crash into disappointment. Men obsessing over a text, over a reaction, over an expression. Men unknowingly project their fears, insecurities, and desires onto women who are equally complex, equally driven by hidden forces. It was a trap, a psychological labyrinth where most men wandered blindfolded. Daniel's fingers hovered over his phone. He wanted to close the apps, to step away, to breathe. But curiosity was stronger. He wanted to understand. He wanted to see what lay behind the forbidden door. And he knew deep down that once he peeked behind it, nothing would ever feel the same again. A sudden sense of urgency gripped him. This wasn't just about dating anymore. It was about understanding life, understanding connection, understanding the hidden patterns that shaped every relationship, every encounter, every attraction. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. And then in the quiet of his apartment, Daniel made a decision. He would no longer accept confusion. He would confront the hidden truths, explore the forbidden door, and face the reality that most men never even acknowledge. What you are about to learn, he whispered to himself, almost as if he were speaking to the universe, will change everything I think I know about women and desire. Outside, the wind howled, shadows stretched across the walls. Behind the ordinary world of apps, messages, and fleeting encounters, something deeper waited, a hidden world of attraction, longing, shadow, and desire. And Daniel, without realizing it, had taken the first step into it. The first time Alex picked up Carl Jung's writings, he felt a shiver run down his spine. It wasn't just curiosity, it was fear and fascination intertwined. He had read books about psychology, self-help, and dating advice, but nothing prepared him for the depth of Jung's exploration. Here was a man who dared to wander into the shadows of the human soul, into the hidden chambers of desire, love, and unconscious drives that most people ignored or actively avoided. Carl Gustav Jung was no ordinary thinker. He was a psychologist, yes, but also a philosopher, a seeker of truth, a man who peered into the human mind with courage few could match. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he didn't shy away from the darkness. He didn't offer simplistic answers or comfortable illusions. Instead, he traced the currents that ran beneath consciousness, the hidden forces that shaped thoughts, emotions, and relationships without most people ever realizing it. Alex read about Jung's concepts, the unconscious, the anima and animus, shadow work, and felt simultaneously enlightened and terrified. The anima, Jung explained, was the unconscious feminine within every man, the animus, the unconscious masculine within every woman. These internal archetypes influenced desires, reactions, and even the people one was drawn to, often in ways invisible to the conscious mind. It was a map of desire unlike anything Alex had encountered before, a guide into the unseen territories of attraction. What struck Alex most was Jung's courage. He didn't merely observe human behavior on the surface, he plunged into its depths. He investigated the thoughts and impulses that society often deemed taboo. He explored desire, not as a frivolous emotion, but as a profound force, capable of shaping lives, relationships, and destiny. Many shied away from such truths, fearing scandal, discomfort, or judgment. Jung faced them head-on. He dared to confront what most men and women avoided, the raw, unfiltered truths about attraction, sexuality, and the unconscious forces driving human connection. Alex imagined Jung in his study, surrounded by ancient texts and drawings, his eyes reflecting an intensity that burned with curiosity and purpose. Jung wrote of the human soul as a complex landscape, filled with hidden valleys of desire, peaks of longing, and shadowy forests of fear. To navigate this terrain required bravery, honesty, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about oneself and others. For Alex, reading Jung was like discovering a forbidden manual. Each paragraph illuminated aspects of himself he had never admitted existed. Each concept opened doors to understanding why certain women captivated him, why he became obsessed with some and indifferent to others, why attraction often seemed illogical, frustrating, and unpredictable. It wasn't magic or luck. It was archetypes, shadows, and the dance between the conscious and unconscious mind. Jung's bravery was more than intellectual, it was personal. He acknowledged that desire, sexuality, and attraction carried a dual nature. They could bring joy, intimacy, and connection, but also obsession, pain, and confusion. He observed patterns of human behavior without judgment, revealing that the unconscious often led men and women into repeated cycles they couldn't understand. The very forces that drew people together could just as easily drive them apart. Alex felt a mixture of awe and fear. He realized that understanding Jung wasn't just an academic exercise. It was a roadmap for survival in the modern jungle of attraction. Every text message, every first date, every fleeting encounter carried the weight of unconscious forces he had never noticed. To ignore them was to wander blindly, To understand them was to gain power, insight, and awareness. As he read deeper, Alex encountered Jung's idea that most people fear the truth about desire because it forces them to confront themselves. Men often project fantasies onto women, chasing illusions rather than reality. Women, too, are shaped by unconscious patterns, sometimes hiding parts of their true selves even from those closest to them. Jung insisted that only by facing these truths, without denial, without shame, could one navigate relationships consciously, avoiding traps, misunderstandings, and heartbreak? Alex's mind buzzed with questions. How had he lived so long without seeing these patterns? How many times had he misread signals, misunderstood intentions, or fallen for illusions because he ignored the hidden currents of desire? Each realization felt like both a shock and a liberation. He sensed that understanding Jung could transform not just dating, but his entire approach to connection, intimacy, and self-awareness. By the time he closed the book for the night, Alex felt as if he had glimpsed a hidden world. A world where desire was no longer random or mysterious, but a complex interplay of shadow, archetype, and conscious choice. He understood that Jung didn't offer easy solutions. He offered clarity, depth, and a path into the forbidden truths that most men never dared to explore. And yet the most tantalizing part was still ahead. Jung's insights weren't just theoretical, they were practical. They would guide Alex and any man willing to learn through the invisible traps of desire, revealing what women often keep hidden, why patterns repeat, and how to approach attraction with awareness and intelligence. Alex leaned back in his chair, the night outside silent and expectant. He felt a mixture of dread and anticipation. The journey ahead promised revelations, discomfort, and transformation. But it also promised mastery over desire, over misunderstanding, over the unseen forces that shape human connection. And as he turned the page, he whispered to himself, I'm ready to see what lies beyond the surface, to understand desire as it really is, even the parts most men are too afraid to acknowledge. Alex thought he understood women. He thought he knew what they wanted, how they would act, how attraction worked. But the deeper he ventured into Jung's writings, the more he realized he had been blind. What fascinated him now was not what women consciously said or did. It was what lurked beneath the surface, in the shadows of their psyche. And he discovered with a jolt, the same shadows lived within him. Jung called this the shadow, the part of the psyche that harbors everything we deny, suppress, or refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. Fears, desires, envy, anger, jealousy, shame, all tucked away in the hidden corners of the mind. It was neither good nor bad, merely unrecognized. Yet these shadows controlled more of human behavior than conscious intentions ever could. Alex thought back to his dating experiences. There was Emma, whose casual teasing left him insecure for days. There was Laura, whose independence both attracted him and ignited a silent resentment he couldn't explain. Each encounter left him confused, frustrated, and obsessed. He thought these women were deliberately mysterious or manipulative. But now reading Jung, he saw a different truth. These encounters were mirrors. They reflected his own hidden fears and unacknowledged desires back at him. Jung explained this as projection. When we attribute our shadow traits onto others, we fail to see that what irritates, frightens, or enthralls us often comes from within. Alex felt this keenly. When a woman rejected him, he felt humiliation, not just because of the rejection itself, but because it stirred his buried insecurities about worth and inadequacy. When a woman flirted, he felt elation and panic, because it awakened unrecognized longings he barely admitted to himself. These were not random reactions, they were shadow responses. One evening, Alex was at a small cafe, observing a couple at a nearby table. The man fumed silently as the woman laughed, her gestures playful but unapologetic. Alex realized he had been that man countless times. He had unconsciously expected women to conform to his ideal, to soothe his insecurities, to act in ways that confirmed his self-image. When they didn't, he felt threatened, confused, and frustrated. The shadow was active, projecting onto the world a narrative that wasn't reality. It was internal. The shadow existed in women too. Jung emphasized that just as men project their hidden traits onto women, women project theirs onto men. A woman might fear abandonment, inadequacy, or intimacy, yet perceive these traits in her partner. Misunderstandings multiply because each person interacts with the other's shadow, not their conscious self. Attraction, then, becomes a dance of shadow and projection, as much about internal reconciliation as external connection. Alex thought of Lara again. Her sharp tongue, her sudden withdrawal, it had driven him to obsession. At the time, he blamed her, seeing her behavior as intentional and cruel. But Jung's teachings revealed a hidden mirror. Her behavior reflected not just her unresolved fears, but his own. His neediness, his desire for validation, his fear of rejection. These shadows had been triggered by her actions. And without recognizing his shadow, he was doomed to repeat the same patterns, falling into attraction-laden traps over and over. The more Alex learned, the more unnerving it became. Understanding the shadow was not comforting, it was terrifying. It forced honesty about impulses, thoughts, and desires he had long denied. It required seeing the parts of himself he disliked, feared, or ignored. It demanded a confrontation with the truth that human desire is never purely rational, never simple, and never free from unconscious influence. Jung argued that only by acknowledging one's shadow could a man truly understand women. Until then, every interaction would be clouded by projection, every misunderstanding fueled by unseen forces. The shadow acted like a hidden lens, distorting reality, creating illusions of betrayal, attraction, or rejection. To navigate desire intelligently, a man must illuminate his own darkness first. Alex began experimenting with awareness. When he felt irritation or jealousy, he paused. Instead of blaming the woman, he asked, "What part of me am I seeing here? What is triggering this reaction?" At first, it was uncomfortable, painful even. He unearthed fears he had buried for years: fear of being unloved, fear of being powerless, fear of not measuring up. He faced desires he had never admitted, cravings for attention, affection, and validation that made him feel ashamed. Yet with each discovery, he felt lighter. Awareness of his shadow created choice. Instead of reacting impulsively to Emma's teasing or Laura's independence, he could observe, understand, and respond consciously. He could recognize when he was projecting and, crucially, begin to untangle the unconscious dance between his shadow and the shadows of the women around him. The process was not linear. Shadows are stubborn. Sometimes Alex would regress, falling back into old patterns of insecurity, attraction, and obsession. But each relapse became an opportunity, a lesson, a mirror reflecting deeper truths. Jung's wisdom echoed, "The shadow cannot be destroyed. It must be integrated. Accepting it, understanding it, and owning it transforms fear into power, confusion into clarity." Alex's understanding deepened further when he realized that attraction itself often involves shadow interplay. He was drawn to women who reflected parts of his shadow, traits he secretly desired or feared. A fiercely independent woman might trigger his envy, admiration, or neediness. A confident woman might expose his insecurity. He was unconsciously seeking to reconcile his hidden aspects through these relationships, even if it caused pain. This realization was shocking. Desire, attraction, and love were not simple emotional experiences. They were psychological interactions with the deepest parts of the psyche. Men who ignored this became puppets of unconscious forces. Women, unknowingly or knowingly, interacted with these shadows, creating cycles of attraction, misunderstanding, and sometimes heartbreak. Alex began to see that the path forward required courage and honesty. Understanding women was not about mastering seduction, decoding texts, or manipulating behavior. It was about understanding himself, his fears, desires, and the shadows he carried. Only then could he approach relationships with clarity, empathy, and conscious choice, rather than reactive obsession. By the end of the night, Alex sat alone in his apartment, reflecting. The shadows of men and women were not enemies. They were guides. Each trigger, each confusion, each inexplicable attraction was a message, a mirror, a hidden map pointing towards self-awareness. Understanding them required patience, honesty, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. And for the first time, Alex felt a flicker of hope. The darkness of desire was not something to fear indefinitely, it was a teacher. By confronting his shadow, he could navigate attraction consciously. By seeing the shadow in women without judgment, he could understand the hidden truths that had eluded him for years. Jung's teachings illuminated a path through the labyrinth of desire, projection, and shadow. It was not an easy path. It demanded courage, patience, and relentless self-exploration. But Alex knew that this journey, as unsettling as it was, offered a reward far greater than fleeting attraction or superficial success. It offered insight into the human soul, mastery over one's own desires, and the ability to approach relationships with clarity, depth, and true understanding. And so, as the night deepened, Alex whispered to himself, "To understand desire, I must first face the darkness within me, and only then can I see the truth in others." Alex had begun to see shadows clearly, but shadows were only part of the story. There was another layer, deeper and far more enigmatic, lurking in the minds of women. One evening, as he scrolled through his dating app, fatigue pressing down on him, he noticed a strange pattern. Each woman seemed to play a role, yet not consciously. Certain traits, gestures, and emotional cues kept repeating, not by coincidence, but by something older, archetypal. He remembered Jung's words. The anima is the archetypal image of the unconscious feminine in the male psyche. But what did that mean in reality? He had read it, nodded at it, and put the book aside. But now it hit him with visceral force. Women, he realized, unconsciously embodied archetypes, deep psychological patterns that mirrored the male psyche, challenged him, seduced him, provoked him. And the consequences of ignoring these patterns were far from trivial. It started with Sophie, a woman he met at a gallery. She was beautiful, confident, and mysterious. But it was her unpredictability that drew him in. One moment, she was playful and warm, the next, distant and enigmatic. At first, Alex felt rejected, frustrated, and confused. But over time, he noticed that her behavior seemed eerily consistent with an archetype, the seductress. She didn't consciously try to manipulate, rather she embodied the shadow of desire, the dangerous allure of the unknown. Every man she encountered was tested, confronted with his own hidden fears and desires. Alex began seeing archetypes everywhere. There was the mysterious unknown, women who seemed impenetrable, whose inner lives were veiled. They challenged men to look inward, confront their anxieties about control, intimacy, and worth. There was the nurturer, whose warmth could heal, but whose subtle needs could entangle men in emotional dependency. Each archetype acted as a mirror, reflecting aspects of Alex's own psyche he had not yet understood. The realization was electrifying and terrifying. Women were not simply acting out personal whims, they were embodying patterns far older than themselves. And male attraction, Alex saw, was not merely a matter of preference, it was an unconscious interaction with these archetypes. A man drawn to the seductress, for instance, was often confronting his own forbidden desires, the parts of himself he denied or feared. A man drawn to the mysterious unknown was grappling with the allure of challenge, of the unknowable, and the anxiety that came with it. Alex remembered Jung's warning, "The archetypes are dangerous if misunderstood. They can lead men into emotional traps, repetitive cycles of obsession and heartbreak." He felt this personally. Each failed relationship was no longer random. It was a lesson in pattern recognition. The women he had loved, or thought he loved, were testing his awareness, provoking his shadow, and forcing him to confront his unconscious reactions. One night, Alex found himself at a small bar, observing a woman across the room. Her posture, the way she laughed, the subtle tilt of her head. It was the seductress again. He felt the familiar pull, the magnetic tension. But instead of rushing in, he paused. He studied her, noting the archetypal patterns at play. Her allure was undeniable, yet he noticed how men around her were reacting. Some entranced, some anxious, some desperate. It was a psychological theater, a play he had once stumbled through blindly. The more Alex observed, the more dangerous he realized these archetypes could be. Misreading them, reacting unconsciously, falling into projection, could lead to emotional devastation. A man who mistook the seductress for love, for instance, would suffer heartbreak. A man who misread the mysterious unknown might chase illusions endlessly. Understanding the archetypes was not merely intellectual, it required deep emotional and psychological insight. Alex's introspection deepened. He recalled a relationship with Clara, a woman whose warmth initially felt like a balm to his insecurities. But gradually he discovered the subtle complexities of her archetype. The nurturer could heal, yes, but she could also demand, challenge, and provoke his hidden fears. Without recognizing the archetype at play, he had been blind to the patterns, blindly reacting to each emotional cue. Jung's teachings became a map. Alex learned to recognize these archetypes, to observe without immediate reaction, to see women as mirrors, and to navigate the dance of desire consciously. He realized that female desire was not chaotic, it was archetypal. It existed in patterns that had persisted across time and culture, reflecting not just women's unconscious but men's too. Yet as illuminating as this realization was, it carried a chilling warning. Few men survive understanding these truths fully. Most stumble, fall prey to unconscious attraction, projection, and obsession. They mistake archetypal seduction for love, archetypal mystery for rejection, archetypal nurturing for personal obligation. Only those willing to confront their own shadow, to embrace introspection, to accept the complexity of desire, could navigate these waters without being consumed. Alex began experimenting with awareness. He paused when attraction stirred, observing the pull without judgment. He questioned the impulses ignited by the seductress, analyzed the tension created by the mysterious unknown, and reflected on the emotional lessons from the nurturer. Each archetype was no longer a trap but a teacher, illuminating hidden aspects of desire, attraction, and human psychology. The journey was not simple. Archetypes were deeply embedded, ancient patterns that operated below the surface of consciousness. Alex found that even when he intellectually recognized them, his emotions still reacted unconsciously. But each recognition strengthened his awareness. Each pause created a space for conscious choice, and each observation revealed deeper truths about himself and the women he encountered. In a final revelation, Alex realized that female desire, channeled through these archetypes, was a form of psychological navigation. Women, consciously or unconsciously, embodied traits that challenged men's shadows, prompting growth, introspection, and confrontation with hidden fears and desires. Attraction was therefore not just external, it was a profound internal dialogue, a negotiation between conscious and unconscious minds. And so, as Alex closed his journal that night, he understood the gravity of the truth. Female desire was not simple, not linear, not safe. It was archetypal, dangerous, and illuminating. Few men could truly survive understanding it, for it demanded confrontation with their deepest shadows, the courage to face their unconscious, and the wisdom to navigate desire consciously. Alex whispered to himself, "Desire is a mirror. To understand her, I must first understand the archetype, and then myself. Only then can I survive this dance of shadows and seduction." Alex sat on a park bench, late evening sunlight fading into shadows. He had been dating Maya for 3 months, and every encounter left him more confused than the last. One day she was open, warm, and affectionate. The next, distant, almost unreadable. His mind spun with questions. Does she like me? Is she testing me? Why is she acting this way? He remembered Jung's teachings about the shadow. Everyone has hidden, unconscious desires and fears. But now he realized women often concealed parts of their shadow with far greater skill than men. These were not lies per se, but carefully guarded truths, psychological defenses honed by society, upbringing, and instinctive survival mechanisms. Maya was not intentionally cruel. She was cautious, conditioned by years of judgment and social expectation. Alex watched her laugh with friends, but noticed subtle pauses, brief hesitations in expression. It was as if she measured herself before revealing her true feelings or desires. Jung had said that the unconscious often communicates through dreams, symbols, and behaviors rather than words. For women, these signals were encoded, sometimes even hidden from themselves. Alex felt the emotional strain. He loved her energy, her mystery, but the unpredictability gnawed at him. Men like him, sensitive, introspective, drawn to depth, often suffered most from this concealment. They became obsessed with decoding subtle cues, replaying conversations, analyzing body language for hidden meaning. The effect was frustration, anxiety, and a persistent sense of being trapped in a puzzle with no solution. One night, Maya shared a story about her childhood, a tale of curiosity punished, questions dismissed, feelings minimized. Alex saw the origin of her careful concealment. Fear of judgment had been instilled early, shaping the way she approached intimacy. Vulnerability could bring punishment, rejection, or emotional harm. Over time, hiding certain desires became a protective instinct. This secrecy was not limited to fear alone. Social conditioning played a role. Women were taught to appear desirable but restrained, nurturing but elusive, confident but not threatening. Their desires, when expressed openly, could clash with societal norms or provoke unwanted attention. The archetypal seductress, the mysterious unknown, the nurturing guide, these patterns were partially hidden for self-preservation, both from society and from men themselves. Alex began to understand the contradictions he had experienced. Maya's warmth and distance, her laughter and sudden silence were not random. They were reflections of concealed shadows and unconscious drives. She was negotiating a complex internal world while responding to external pressures, and men often misread these cues, interpreting them as inconsistency, game playing, or rejection. He remembered a conversation with a friend. "Women are complicated," his friend said, shrugging. But Alex realized it wasn't just complexity, it was concealment by necessity. The hidden truths were often too raw, too dangerous, or too socially unacceptable to reveal. Men who could not navigate this landscape became entangled, drawn into emotional patterns that left them frustrated and confused. Jung's insight was clear. To understand women, one must first understand the mechanisms of concealment, the shadow desires, the unconscious motivations, the archetypal patterns. They were not meant to be malicious, but they required skill, awareness, and emotional intelligence to interpret correctly. Alex tested his new understanding in small ways. He observed without judgment, listening more than questioning. He noticed how Maya hesitated before sharing personal opinions, how she gauged his reactions before revealing her feelings. Instead of reacting with frustration, he began responding with patience and empathy. The effect was subtle but profound. Maya became gradually more open, revealing layers of thought, desire, and personality that had previously been hidden. This pattern extended beyond Maya. Alex noticed it in friends, colleagues, even casual acquaintances. Women often concealed aspects of their psyche to protect themselves, to test compatibility, or to navigate complex social structures. Their behavior was a negotiation between inner desire and external reality, a delicate balance that men frequently misinterpreted. The emotional effect on men was predictable. When confronted with concealed desire, men often felt powerless, obsessed, or inadequate. They wanted clarity, honesty, and consistency, but the very nature of the archetypal and unconscious patterns resisted these expectations. Misreading cues could lead to intense attraction or repulsion, often in rapid succession. Obsession, frustration, and emotional turmoil were common side effects. Alex reflected on his own journey. Each confusing encounter, each paradoxical action from a woman he admired, had been a lesson in awareness. He learned that frustration was not the enemy. Ignorance was. By observing, questioning internally, and understanding the archetypal patterns, he could navigate the landscape of desire without becoming a victim to it. Jung's perspective became increasingly relevant. He emphasized the importance of facing one's own shadow before attempting to understand others. Alex realized that male projection often amplified confusion. Men projected their fears, insecurities, and unmet desires onto women, misinterpreting concealment as manipulation or cruelty. Understanding women's hidden truths required understanding one's own unconscious reactions first. By embracing this perspective, Alex began seeing a new pattern in dating. Women were not simply inconsistent, they were guardians of their own hidden depths, shaped by evolution, society, and personal history. Their concealment was a natural self-protective response, and the key to connection was conscious awareness, patience, and psychological insight. He remembered a particularly intense evening with Maya. She had been distant all day, curt in texts, and he felt the familiar frustration rising. Instead of reacting, he paused. He reflected on the lessons of concealment, observed his emotional response, and approached her calmly. She shared her insecurities, her fears, and a desire for connection, truths that had been hidden behind layers of protective behavior. The relief and intimacy that followed were profound. Alex finally understood. Female desire was complex, often hidden, and deliberately concealed for survival and psychological balance. The contradictions that frustrated men were signals of depth, shadow, and archetypal patterning, not random inconsistencies. Navigating modern dating successfully required acknowledging this concealment, approaching it with awareness, and responding with empathy rather than confusion. The emotional takeaway was clear. Frustration and obsession were not signs of weakness. They were opportunities for growth. Men who could observe, reflect, and understand these hidden layers could form deeper, more meaningful connections. Those who could not often fell into repetitive patterns of misinterpretation, heartbreak, and emotional exhaustion. As Alex walked home that night, he realized the enormity of what he had learned. The world of female desire was not a simple landscape of attraction and rejection. It was a complex, archetypal theater where concealment, shadow, and unconscious motivation played central roles. Understanding it required courage, insight, and a willingness to confront one's own hidden depths. Jason sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, the hum of the city outside barely reaching him. His phone buzzed again, a message from Emily. She was the latest in a string of women who had captured his attention, each leaving him frustrated, confused, and emotionally drained. He read her words carefully, dissecting every nuance, every pause, every emoji. Yet no matter how closely he analyzed them, he could never predict her actions. This pattern was all too familiar. Jason realized he was falling into the same trap again, chasing desire without understanding its hidden dynamics. Jung's teachings echoed in his mind, the shadow, projections, and archetypes. He had read about these concepts but never fully grasped their practical consequences until now. The trap was subtle. Men often fall into obsession, not with a real person, but with a projection, an image shaped by their desires, fears, and unmet needs. Jason thought he loved Emily for who she was, but in truth, he was chasing the idealized figure his unconscious mind had constructed, the perfect woman who would validate him, excite him, and fulfill his hidden fantasies. Each encounter intensified his obsession. Emily's warmth felt like affirmation, her distance like rejection, a cycle that kept him perpetually on edge. He noticed the psychological tension building within himself, anxiety, overthinking, and a desperate need for control. Jung had warned about this pattern. The more a man chases a projection, the more he becomes enslaved to it, mistaking illusion for reality. Jason's friends had noticed his struggles. "You need to stop overanalyzing," one said. "Just let things flow naturally." But it wasn't that simple. Men like Jason, sensitive and introspective, are wired to perceive emotional subtleties acutely. When confronted with the hidden desires and archetypal shadows of women, their responses intensify. Projection, attachment, and emotional overinvestment become almost automatic. He reflected on past relationships. There was Anna, who seemed perfect until she pulled away unexpectedly. There was Claire, whose mysterious allure had kept him obsessively guessing her intentions. Each time the pattern repeated, he was drawn into the woman's shadow, reacting to her unconscious cues rather than engaging with her as a real whole person. Each heartbreak left him more confused, more desperate to get it right next time. Jung's principle became painfully clear. Men unconsciously chase projections, not individuals. The woman's true self often remained hidden, protected by social conditioning, fear, and unconscious defense mechanisms. Men, blinded by desire and their own shadows, mistook these illusions for genuine connection. The emotional intensity created a kind of psychological entrapment, where the deeper the attachment, the more power the hidden desire held over them. One evening, Jason finally reached a breaking point. Emily had canceled their plans at the last minute, offering vague excuses. Instead of responding calmly, he spiraled into frustration and anxiety, texting her repeatedly, analyzing her every action. The trap had claimed him once again. He realized in a moment of stark clarity that his obsession was not about Emily at all. It was about the archetype she represented in his mind. The emotional toll was severe. Sleepless nights, racing thoughts, and self-doubt became constant companions. He recognized the classic signs of being trapped in desire: projection, overinvestment, and emotional volatility. His friend's warnings now rang true. He was not pursuing a real woman, but a reflection of his own unconscious longings. Yet amid the shock and frustration, a glimmer of hope appeared. Jason remembered Jung's advice. Awareness was the key to liberation. By recognizing the pattern, by seeing the projection for what it truly was, men could break free from the emotional trap. It wasn't about suppressing desire, but understanding it, observing it without becoming enslaved. Jason took a deep breath and decided to act differently. Instead of texting Emily immediately, he paused, reflecting on his feelings. He acknowledged the projection, the shadows of his own desires, and the archetypal patterns at play. He reminded himself, "She is a real person, not a mirror of my unconscious fantasies." This conscious awareness shifted his perspective. The obsession loosened its grip, replaced by curiosity and clarity. He realized that the trap was not inevitable. Breaking free required insight, patience, and the courage to confront one's own shadows. Jason also began noticing the subtle lessons embedded in the cycle of desire. Each woman he encountered, each projection he chased, provided a mirror to his own unconscious patterns. By observing without judgment, he could identify recurring themes, emotional triggers, and shadow projections. What once caused pain now became a guide to self-awareness and personal growth. The key takeaway emerged. Men are not powerless victims of hidden desire. The trap exists, but it can be seen, understood, and transcended. Awareness transforms obsession into insight, projection into understanding, and emotional entanglement into clarity. Men who learn to navigate these patterns with self-knowledge and empathy can engage with women authentically, without being consumed by unconscious desires. Jason smiled, a rare feeling of calm washing over him. The trap was real, painful, and pervasive, but it was not permanent. The forbidden dance of desire, projection, and shadow could be observed, understood, and even enjoyed without losing oneself. He had glimpsed the pathway out, and for the first time in months he felt a sense of control, a sense of freedom from the cycle that had once dominated his life. Ethan sat in the quiet of his small apartment, the city lights flickering through the blinds. A journal lay open on his lap, its pages half filled with messy, hurried notes, sketches of emotions he could barely name. For months he had been trapped in the same pattern, chasing women who seemed elusive, feeling attraction that always ended in disappointment, obsessing over small gestures and unspoken signals. Tonight something was different. He wasn't texting, checking social media, or analyzing every detail of someone else's behavior. He was looking inward, confronting a truth that terrified him. The chaos in his love life wasn't caused by women. It was caused by him. Carl Jung had warned of this long ago. The shadow, the hidden aspects of oneself that one refuses to see, often projects outward. Men who fail to confront their shadow repeat the same painful patterns in relationships. Ethan had read about it, but reading was not enough. Knowledge without action was still ignorance. He picked up his pen and wrote the first line. "What am I afraid of in love?" The question felt monumental, almost impossible to answer. But as he wrote, memories surfaced. Moments when he had clung too tightly, reacted too strongly, or misinterpreted signals. Each incident was a reflection of his own shadow: insecurities, neediness, fear of abandonment, and unacknowledged desires for validation. Jung's challenge was clear. To engage with women consciously, a man must first confront himself. Ethan realized that the women he had pursued weren't the problem. They were mirrors. Each rejection, each confusing action, each emotional tug-of-war had exposed his own weaknesses and unhealed wounds. He continued journaling, now with a deliberate honesty that made him uneasy. I fear being alone. I fear not being enough. I seek validation where it cannot be given. The words were raw, uncomfortable, but liberating. By naming his shadows, he gave them form, taking them out of the hidden recesses of his mind where they had controlled him unconsciously. Ethan paused, reflecting on his emotions as he wrote. He saw a pattern. In every failed connection, he had projected his insecurities onto women, assuming they held the power to complete him. Jung had called this the projection of the anima, the unconscious feminine ideal that men superimpose onto real women. Each attraction, each disappointment was less about the other person and more about him encountering his own unconscious desires and fears. Vulnerability became his tool. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to feel every uncomfortable emotion fully: shame, jealousy, longing, fear, without judgment. He wrote, he cried, he acknowledged the darkness within. This was the essence of Jungian shadow work, seeing the hidden, unacknowledged parts of oneself, accepting them, and integrating them into conscious awareness. The process was not easy. Shadows are persistent. They resist recognition, sometimes masquerading as anger, lust, or obsession. Ethan felt waves of discomfort, sudden doubts, and the urge to flee back into distractions. But he pressed on, knowing that freedom from the destructive patterns required facing these very feelings. He also began questioning his own desires. Were they authentic, or were they echoes of childhood wounds, cultural conditioning, and unmet needs? He examined his expectations of women, the fantasies he had carried unconsciously, and the subtle judgments he had projected. Each revelation was a crack in the armor of his old self, a step closer to self-mastery. Through journaling and reflection, Ethan discovered another profound insight. True connection does not arise from chasing someone else's mystery or attempting to control desire. It arises from clarity, honesty, and presence. A man who understands his own shadow can approach women without projections, without neediness, and without unconscious traps. Desire becomes conscious, interactions become authentic, and relationships have the potential to flourish. The emotional payoff was palpable. As Ethan closed his journal for the night, he felt a sense of empowerment he had never known. The heavy weight of confusion and frustration lifted slightly, replaced by insight and determination. He wasn't perfect. His shadows remained, but they were no longer invisible puppeteers controlling his heart. Jung's challenge was not a one-time task, but a lifelong practice. Shadows evolve, desires shift, and new projections emerge. Yet each confrontation, each act of introspection, strengthened Ethan's ability to navigate relationships consciously. He realized that freedom begins within, that the path to genuine connection is paved with self-awareness, courage, and emotional honesty. Ethan smiled, a quiet, steady smile. For the first time, he felt ready to step into the world of dating without fear, without obsession, and without unconscious traps. The challenge of facing the shadow was daunting, but it was also the doorway to real freedom, real intimacy, and a love that could finally be grounded in reality rather than projection. Ethan had stepped into the modern dating world cautiously, carrying the lessons of his shadow work. Dating apps glowed on his phone like neon invitations to temptation and confusion. Each swipe promised connection, yet he could sense an undercurrent of emptiness, patterns that repeated themselves in every chat, every encounter. He remembered his early days on these platforms: endless scrolling, rapid judgments, fleeting conversations, and disappointment that came too quickly. Women seemed like puzzles, their messages cryptic, their intentions unclear. Ethan's insecurities had flared up every time a chat ended abruptly, triggering his old patterns of projection and obsession. He had chased illusions, believing validation came from matches, likes, and attention. But now armed with Jung's insights, he saw the underlying dynamics. Each interaction revealed archetypal patterns, not just personal quirks. The seductive archetype, the mysterious woman who seemed just out of reach, triggered his shadow. The longing for approval, the fear of rejection, the desire to possess what he could not fully understand. His old self would have fallen straight into the trap, projecting fantasies and chasing desire blindly. Ethan began observing consciously. He noticed how certain messages sparked an emotional reaction before he even fully processed the words. Why did a playful tease feel like a test? Why did ambiguity feel like a rejection? Jung's teachings whispered the answer. These were projections, reflections of his unintegrated fears and desires. Recognizing them didn't make the feelings vanish, but it gave him control over his responses. He started experimenting with awareness. Instead of reacting impulsively, he paused. He asked himself, am I attracted to this person or to the idea of what she represents in my shadow? The difference was profound. By separating projection from reality, Ethan navigated conversations without losing himself. He could enjoy attraction without being consumed by it, interact without obsession, and notice the subtle cues that revealed authenticity. Dating apps and social media were modern stages for age-old patterns. Hookup culture, with its emphasis on instant gratification, often intensified the shadow's influence. Lust and desire could trigger unconscious neediness, jealousy, or competition. Men and women, unaware of their projections, reacted to each other emotionally rather than rationally. Ethan realized that conscious observation was his superpower. It allowed him to recognize archetypal triggers, shadow projections, and hidden desires in real time. For instance, he matched with a woman named Lila, whose enigmatic messages and playful teasing initially sparked excitement and the familiar surge of possessiveness. But Ethan noticed it. He journaled his emotional responses before replying, identifying which reactions belonged to him and which belonged to her. He approached the conversation authentically, not as a man seeking validation, but as someone curious and present. The dynamic shifted instantly. What could have been a trap of obsession became a genuine exchange of intrigue and connection. Ethan also began to identify archetypes in others more clearly. Some women embodied the seductress unconsciously, testing boundaries and sparking desire. Others mirrored the nurturing anima, creating feelings of comfort and security. Each interaction was no longer a chaotic, emotional roller coaster, but a map for understanding both himself and the people he met. He could engage with authenticity, avoiding the traps that had ensnared him for years. Practical awareness became his guiding principle. Observe without judgment. See the behaviors and patterns for what they are. Identify projections. Ask, is this about them or is it about my shadow? Engage authentically. Respond from conscious choice, not emotional reactivity. Respect boundaries. Archetypes are not obligations. They are reflections of unconscious tendencies. Through these practices, Ethan began to notice a shift in his dating life. Superficial attraction still existed, but it no longer dictated his emotions. He was no longer desperate for approval or consumed by mystery. Instead, he approached interactions with curiosity, respect, and clarity. The modern dating world, once a maze of confusion, became a landscape of conscious exploration. By the end of his week on the apps, Ethan felt a sense of readiness. He had seen the shadows in others, recognized his own patterns, and navigated desire without losing himself. Jung's lens had transformed modern dating from a source of frustration into a field for learning and growth. The final lesson was clear. Conscious awareness allows men to experience attraction without falling into illusions. Desire, when observed and understood, becomes a doorway to connection rather than a trap. Ethan felt a deep sense of preparedness, not for casual flings, but for meaningful interactions, relationships built on honesty, presence, and emotional clarity. He closed the app for the night, smiling quietly. The path was still challenging. Modern dating remained a jungle of impulses and projections, but he now had the map to navigate it consciously. The shadow, once a source of confusion and pain, had become a guide, showing him how to engage authentically and avoid the traps of hidden desire. As Ethan lay in bed, He felt anticipation for the next step. Beyond the games, beyond superficial attraction, was the potential for a deep connection, a bond untainted by projection, illusions, or unconscious patterns. Jung's teachings had prepared him not just to survive the modern dating world, but to thrive in it, ready to experience desire in its most conscious, transformative form. Ethan had walked a long, winding path. The lessons from his shadow work, the insights into archetypes, and the conscious observation of modern dating had transformed him in ways he hadn't imagined. He no longer reacted blindly to attraction, nor was he ensnared by projections or illusions. Desire, once a source of chaos, had become a mirror, reflecting both his inner self and the subtle truths of the women he encountered. It was during a quiet evening at a local art exhibit that Ethan met Celine. Unlike any encounter he had experienced before, there was no instant obsession, no desperate need for validation. Instead, there was mutual curiosity, a recognition of depth in each other. Her presence felt familiar and grounding, as if they were both glimpsing parts of themselves reflected back through the other. They talked about art, dreams, and the peculiar patterns of life. Yet underlying the conversation was a sense of understanding neither had to explain. Ethan noticed how Celine mirrored authenticity, her laughter unguarded, her curiosity genuine, her awareness clear. There were no games, no hidden motives, no projections of desire demanding attention. He felt liberated from the traps he had once fallen into. The shadow that had haunted his dating life seemed at peace. Ethan reflected on Jung's teachings. The seductress archetype, the anima, the shadow projections, the unconscious patterns, all were now visible to him as guides rather than threats. Celine's behaviors did not trigger obsession or fear. He could see the archetypal forces at play, but responded consciously, grounded in his own awareness. He realized that true connection required this level of self-knowledge. Without it, desire would remain a battlefield of projections and illusions. Their interactions flowed naturally. Ethan noticed the subtle dynamics, moments of playful challenge, gentle teasing, quiet vulnerability. Each was a test not of dominance or possession, but of mutual presence and understanding. No longer did he chase her mystery or try to decode hidden meanings. Instead, he embraced the reality of her as a whole, complex individual, just as he had embraced his own complexity. Emotionally, the transformation was profound. Relief washed over him, relief from the endless chase, the confusion, the frustration, and the obsession that had defined his previous relationships. Satisfaction replaced longing, liberation replaced fear, and with this freedom came a sense of empowerment, not in control over someone else, but over himself. Ethan understood at last that real love and desire were conscious forces. They required self-awareness, honesty, and the courage to face one's own shadow. The shadows he had feared in women were merely reflections of his own unresolved patterns. By understanding himself, he could see desire clearly, without being trapped or manipulated. And in doing so, he could offer authenticity, respect, and presence to another soul. Celine's presence reinforced this truth. She too had navigated her own shadows, her own unconscious patterns. Their connection was not a collision of illusions, but a meeting of conscious, aware selves. Desire was no longer a chaotic fire threatening to consume him. It was a spark of shared humanity, illuminating understanding, intimacy, and growth. Ethan reflected on the journey, the forbidden door of female desire, the dark shadows within himself and others, the dangerous archetypes, the concealment of truth, the traps of projection, the challenge of self-work, and the lessons of modern dating. All of these had led to this moment, a reckoning where desire was no longer feared or blindly pursued, but understood, integrated, and embraced. He realized that freedom in love and desire does not come from control over others, nor from chasing fantasies. It comes from understanding self and others, from conscious presence, from seeing the archetypal and shadow dynamics without being consumed by them. True attraction, true intimacy is transformative. It shapes both individuals, fostering growth, awareness, and authentic connection. Ethan's heart felt light as he walked Celine home that evening. No games, no traps, No illusions, just shared laughter, genuine conversation, and the quiet satisfaction of being fully present. He knew the shadows would always exist. Desires would always rise. But now he had the tools, the awareness, and the clarity to navigate them consciously without losing himself. In that moment, Ethan felt a deep sense of completion. The lessons of Jung, the trials of shadow work, the insights into archetypes and desire, all had culminated in this profound understanding. Desire was no longer a source of suffering. It was a doorway to conscious, transformative love. And with this realization came true freedom, the freedom to engage, to connect, and to love without illusion, obsession, or fear. He looked at Celine and smiled, understanding that this was the essence of the final reckoning, integrating knowledge, self-awareness, and presence into every interaction. This was not the end, but a new beginning, a life where desire served awareness, where love was conscious and where freedom was found in understanding both self and others. Ethan had finally stepped beyond the illusions, beyond the traps, beyond the projections. He had entered a realm of conscious desire and authentic connection. And in this realm, he realized, true freedom is the greatest gift of all.